Today I'm on the air with the memes of destruction. A fellow user of the internet, just put someone who likes discussing politics, likes having amiable conversations. And today we're doing one here on my channel. So introduce yourself, memes.
Hey guys, what's going on? This is the Memes of Destruction here. I am technically an ancient YouTuber from pre-Google purchase times, but I've reemerged in a different form. So, how are we all doing today?
We're all right. Still riding the buzz of a cup final win. I believe I mentioned the other day. But
Yeah,
beyond
we were
that,
talking about the video a little bit, man. That must have been quite the time.
it's quite surreal being in that sort of atmosphere. Like everyone just sort of puts aside, like you've obviously never met people you're with, but you all got the common cause of like supporting your team. In my case, Fulham. And when you win the game, when you like see your side like lifting, that cup, it's like it means something in a really weird way. Because obviously, I don't know the names of the people I was sat around. I don't know, probably never going to see some of those people again. But for those brief like few hours, they're your brothers essentially,
You
brothers
guys
and
got that
sisters.
connection.
Yeah,
Now,
exactly.
speaking of that, so what team can we get behind to get folks a little unwound from all this drama and politics and the internet and the world?
um, what in terms of like just sport or?
Well, a lot of folks, it could, just because when you were describing your experience of that cup game the other day, Owen, I'll be straight up, man. Like, if I just took what the words coming out of your mouth and I replaced that with, I don't know, Labor, Tory, Democrat, Republican, all these labels that really don't seem to mean anything anymore, but actually at the same time seem to mean more than anything else nowadays. Like, what's going on?
Uh, well, I think that there's quite ironically two sides to that sort of thing because whilst I think it's important to recognize that we are all the same, like, we're all human and we can all sort of not even get along, be happy around each other if we all try. I think that it's still important to recognize that systemically and politically we still need to do work to achieve that. So, for instance, with a football game, you want to have a situation where people who want to enjoy the game can. I was quite lucky in that I had some help sort of getting a ticket because I've got friends who are quite into football and know people and stuff, so it was easier for me to get a ticket. However, lots of people aren't not going to have that opportunity and might have missed out on their team because obviously like not everyone can just get themselves to London. I'm also lucky because I have family who live in London, and subsequently, accommodation isn't as big an issue for me as say,
You got the
someone.
hookup.
Sorry.
You got the hookup.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like if you've got people who can help you out with stuff, it's a much easier thing. Um, but as much as you want, what I said at the start, to be just everyone getting along and stuff, we've got to work to that position by analyzing the world around us and stuff. So I think whilst it's obviously great to sort of idealize about the future, we got to use the labels and the analysis today to get there, if that makes sense.
That makes much sense. It's just what I often see is, regardless of whatever opposing side it may be, it's very often the actual ends that we're looking to get. And a lot of times we're not even discussing what we're getting to. Like, I feel like it's like the old school, like Romeo and Juliet, like, well, you did this to me, you did this to me, I can't let this go. And we're escalating. It's almost like, and maybe it's because I hang out with like a lot of more kind of libertarian folks. They're always pitching like the non-aggression pact. And I think there's something to that. Because like I have seen it in life where it's just like, all right, there's a certain point where you get to where all of a sudden you're coming to blows. I think you can usually avoid that. And the way I say this is like, especially on social media now, when you have the ability to literally interact. Because I remember back in the day, you're like, oh, if everyone in the world, if we can just talk to each other, everything will be fine. But human beings are complicated creatures. We went from creatures like literally living in societies where you only run across maybe 200, 300, maybe you live in a city, maybe a couple of thousand folks you maybe actually truly interact with over time. Maybe you see more, but at least the world was very small and you would see things that would happen. Now we have the ability to instantly shed our opinion, show our mind. We're seeing the positives and the negatives of this at the same time. The way I see it is you had folks, 7 billion people, several billion on, folks with all different cultures, all different ideologies from all around the world that went from basically small scale face-to-face interactions to being able to interact with folks whom they may have disagreed in the past or have a different ideology instantaneously over the internet, where, let's face it, in order to promote yourself, I think everybody either likes drama or, as a wise man once said, a very hot dumpster fire.
There is some truth to what you're saying in that the allure of drama and contention and aggression is there. If you're at odds with a lot of people all the time and you're constantly sort of being divisive and loud, you are going to get those the eyes looking in your direction on social media. And yeah, I can sort of see why someone looking at all this and sort of being a bit annoyed at the waste of potential that social media poses. Like you said, like imagine, someone tells you a decade ago, oh, in the future you can speak to anyone just with a few clicks on your computer. You're going to see the internet become this massive platform where anyone can connect with anyone, regardless of where they are on the planet. You're thinking, oh, that's going to be amazing, and then you look to how it is today, where it's like just like you said, a dumpster fire. And yeah, people can be alienated with that, and people can think, oh, let's just go to this sort of right-wing libertarian sort of groups you were thinking about, where it's very much they're clinging to the NAP, the ideals of sort of everyone to themselves, just you do you, I'll do me. And from a very basic outlet, you can sort of see why that would be alluring, because it's like, oh well, everyone just keeps to themselves and they'll be fine. But ultimately, that sort of mindset isn't really healthy for and not only analyzing the world, but sort of thinking about the systems we have on the planet, and just in terms of human beings in general, because we may be flawed animals, we may be flawed in terms of who we are, but we're still social animals. We still benefit from the company and time and pleasure around others and stuff. And both socially and politically, I think that it's important to engage with those axes and try and move forward in those areas. So, for instance, with social, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I opened up the stream. I'm a noob. My apologies.
No worries. Mistakes are made. Yeah. So, instead of perhaps, clinging to a non-aggression pact, we can think, oh, well, maybe if we want to have a world where, aggression and hostility isn't at the forefront, we need to deconstruct the systems around it. So, for instance, you often hear the NAP cited a lot in regards to property and land. But you got to then think about how many people actually own their property and how many people, are renting it to a landlord, and thus it's not their own property that they are, having to manage. It's the landlords they're having to pay rent towards just to get by, which is, the more you think about that, that's a pretty unfair sort of system, and goes against the idea that people have their own, because like loads of people in society don't have their own at all. We can think about social media. And yeah, people are hostile on it, but then you look at all the stuff that's on there, and you can sort of see why lots of groups might be. Like you look at the efforts of people on the far right to sort of smear queer people. So, for instance, recently, for not the first time, people on far right websites and on I wouldn't say the dark web, but like on I can't think of a word now. Not even Reddit, really. I suppose, like, yeah, the darker corners.
Reddit or 4chan.
There you go. Yeah, that's. But
yeah, you don't want to mess with those folks. They can.
No, it's not. Anything. No, it's not great, is it? But they've been trying to spread stuff about how the P in LGBTQ, and obviously you'll be following letters, how the P stands for pedosexual, which is obviously it's a complete lie. It's pansexual, and no one in the queer community has ever sort of said, oh, it's pedosexual. But you look at the efforts of people trying to spread that around. You look at all you get there's like doctored images and stuff, and to the like average layman on social media, you could be fooled by that. And if that's going to provoke hostility amongst different people, because you've got some people saying out of genuine concern, oh, well, why are there paedophiles in this movement? And then queer people saying, oh, well, no, this is all complete rubbish. It's pedosexual is a made up thing. And you've got all these arguments, and you've got people who are benefiting from this on the far right and stuff. And yeah, it's a mess, but we got to work through the mess to make things better, because you don't make things better by just ignoring it. Imagine if your room was a complete mess. Just cause if it doesn't matter if you go and take your
how are you seeing through my piece of duct tape? All right. The only reason I say that is just because I want to bring up just one story, if that's all right. It's my cousin, actually, at one point, he is a lover of books. He is technically a bibliophile. He actually, when he got his tattoo from coming back from the service, which is actually when I got my tattoo as well, he got bibliophile. The only issue that he would have is if he happened to be wearing a long sleeve shirt, it only basically, if he rolled up the sleeves, it only went up to file. So it was one of those things where he didn't even think about it until after. He's like, oh, crap. People may have some questions, but no, if you actually roll up, it just says bibliophile, because like my cousin, he was a really big reader. And before we touch on that topic, Owen, and break the internet, is it all right if we go back to the initial thing and kind of just maybe focus on a topic that I think would actually be quite productive?
That would be quite good, yeah. And
okay,
I can focus on it just as soon as I finish what I was saying.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
It's no problem. I was speaking for quite a while, but all I was going to say was, imagine if your room was a mess, and then rather than go and clean it, you put your pillow and your quill on the sofa and just slept there. It's like, yeah, fine, your bed's all right technically, because you're on the sofa, but you've lost an entire room of your house to just the clutter you've not cleared up. You got to think about what's directly problematic in the situation, rather than just sort of diverting it, which I feel as though too many libertarians do when they sort of have all these principles of non-aggression and just everyone keep to themselves, and you do you, I'll do me, when really societally we need to be addressing things together and moving forward together for the benefit of everyone. Anyway, like you said, let's focus on the topic. Where do you want to start? Or focus
so when we say far right, what does that mean? Or at least, like, what is your consideration? I'm just trying to get in the head, because like I hear many things and it seems to mean many different things to many different people. So I'm just trying to extrapolate, just like what comes to mind, what springs out of your head.
Okay. So the far right, generally, as I see them, they're fascists, Nazis, white nationalists. Obviously, there are more labels, but people who, take the capitalist framework we have today and ramp it up using, things like nationalism, racism, mass incarceration, authoritarianism, suppression of workers' rights, all these techniques to accruing more profit and extracting more profit. Accruing more capital, extracting more profit from the workers. So obviously, capitalism itself is about the extraction of profit. About taking what you have, your capital, and making more from that capital. And obviously, there's no limit on what that can be. So, be it through taking profit from the environment, the land, making workers sell their labor to you to make profit and stuff. There's all those different ways. Fascism and the far right is simply the lowering of the standard of doing that. So, for instance, you might have a conservative with, maybe some pretty economically right-wing views, but who's generally, maybe they're not like bigoted or anything. They're just being, oh, well, the economy should be laissez-faire, not many regulations, just like that. But then,
whistles.
Sorry,
the dog whistling, or something like that. Kind of like you're saying something or not saying something, and it's kind of playing to certain folks. Or
well, actually, that can come into it later. But actually, what I was going to say was the difference between the two. So take that conservative. When times are harder, when capitalism's not doing as well, when profits are harder to accrue, the fascist is a person who will lower those limits, who will see the conservative and go up a step and say, oh, actually, we don't need to offer these workers protections. We don't need to allow them to strike because that's actually going to harm our control of our capital. We can suddenly start imprisoning people, for ridiculous reasons. So, for instance, you look at the crackdown on immigrants in the US at the moment, and in other countries as well. And you see them being sort of put in really terribly run prisons, or sent to essentially what amounts to labor camps, where they're having to do cheap labor for corporations. That is essentially a way of making profit, just lowering a limit and then having your workers be paid nothing or next to nothing.
Takes work away from other folks too. Yeah.
Exactly, like all these different. That's essentially what I see fascism as, and there's that fundamental relationship between capitalism and fascism, which is why I think if you I don't know if you follow me on Twitter or not, but I speak about it quite a bit. Just the way that fascism stems from capitalism. So when I describe the far right, I talk about these extreme capitalists, sort of the next step for capitalists when they realize oh, the system isn't working at present. How are we going to continue protecting our profit? How are we going to continue making capital and stuff?
So fear of an authoritarian takeover. That's kind of like your fear of that coming to fruition. Is that kind of where you're going, or?
To a degree, because you look at what's happened in the past. Like, for instance, obviously the most common example is Hitler, and I think it's obviously it's an important thing to keep in mind, because you look at what happened in Nazi Germany with the the Great Depression sort of happening around the world, and the capitalist class, the wealthy, sort of fearing, oh well, if we don't do something, we're going to face a similar situation to in Russia, where the ruling class was sort of overthrown. So they turn to this group of people who say, "Oh, well, we'll protect your private property. We'll make sure your capital is insured, and we'll do all these things to help you if you accept our social conditions." So obviously, in Hitler's case, it was getting rid of the Jews and getting rid of the intellectuals and gutting the state of politically endorsed actors. So the socialists, communists, and eventually even more moderate left wingers were all sort of imprisoned and stuff.
But would you say the Brexit and the election of the Cheeto Führer are a form of catharsis for certain folks? Because I believe what happened in kind of like World War II Germany, we had World War I. They were crushed into oblivion and everything. So as those folks were fighting their way back, all of a sudden they were so used to just being I mean, you could use the word literally oppressed or just depressed in some way, where all of a sudden some guy comes along, he starts saying a lot of things. A lot of crowds start cheering. And a lot of those folks, they remember how bad it was the last war. And he managed to convince probably a lot of good folks to do some really terrible things. Like basically, is the Brexit a catharsis in a way?
Sort of. I mean, I think it's worth saying that you are right in the fact that Hitler did use themes of national identity and pride in the fallout from World War One, where, like you say, Germany was faced some serious repercussions for the actions in World War One, and subsequently lots of people were upset. However, I think it's also important to analyze the fact that fascists recognize that their sort of mobilization and popularity comes from populism, but also being anti, normalized systems. So at the same time as the rise of the Nazis, you were seeing the Communist Party and the Socialist Party also being quite popular, which is why Hitler very famously, banned the Communist Party and imprisoned their leaders almost as soon as he had the chance to. So he blamed the Reichstag fire on a communist. They essentially they found some guy drunk in a pub, saying, "Oh, I did the Reichstag fire," and they said, "Oh, he's a communist," and that was a justification for gutting the country of an entire political group.
Wait! You're saying that the Communist Party was exterminated because some guy was trolling folks at a bar?
Well, he was looking for a reason to get rid of them. He described them as left terrorism for quite a while, but the Reichstag fire was like the what's it called, the match that set off the fire. Basically, it was the catalyst for the the removal of the Communist Party. But it's not like confirmed whether that guy did do it. But knowing this, the clear lies of Nazi Germany, would you be surprised if Hitler had just found someone convenient enough to sort of say, "Oh, this person was the one who did it"? Like,
Well, my number one universal truth is people ruin everything.
um, well, but indeed, though, like Hitler he saw the opportunity and got rid of the Communist Party, and then the next election was the one Hitler won a majority in after he removed significant parts of the electorate, and then obviously there weren't any more elections after that because the Nazis took over. But what I was going back to what I was saying, if we link it back to Brexit, because well, obviously, want to go back to what you were saying. It's about that populism. You look at where the change could have come from with Brexit, and we could see that instead of blaming just this sort of vague conception of the EU and stuff, which people like, I get the impression lots of people don't really know that much about what they're voting for. And certainly in regards to that referendum, it was very much like you're not going into a full sort of confidence. There's not really much solid information. The two people you're having to choose between, essentially, like the two leaders of both sides of the thing were Nigel Farage and then David Cameron. Like you imagine you've got to choose between them. Like you're going to be a bit disillusioned with them.
Aren't you describing the past U.S. election, Owen?
Um,
Because like in that case, I kind of get where you're coming from on that. But see, here's the thing. It's just like on the whole, like Hitler doing that and everything. I think that's going to piss off a lot of those communist folks, which is why they probably hated each other. And to give Stalin credit, the Soviet amount of tanks produced, even Hitler couldn't believe it. I mean, some folks were in very harsh conditions. War is hell, and very bad things happen. But it's just a lot. Here's the thing: like I happened to go to a Professor Jordan Peterson event the other day, and I mean he was telling stories, and like around his house, he actually has a lot of Soviet era artwork after he remodeled it, but he doesn't have any Nazi era artwork. And he asked a question in an interview a long time ago. He's like, I'm not even sure why that is, though. It's like, I'm all right with this stuff, but even if some folks will say like more folks died under these particular regimes or stuff like that, he's like, but it doesn't have the same visceral reaction. I thought about it a bit when he was speaking, and I'm curious what you think. Basically, under more of like the communist method, millions of people died as a result of a plan. It may have been poorly implemented, but with the National Socialists, millions of people died as part of the plan. Basically, it seemed like that was more of kind of the goal. Like, I'm curious what you think about that.
Okay. So I think the most important thing to start with is that sorry, I just coughed then. Stalin, is I don't think it's really accurate to sort of describe him or his nation as a communist. And obviously, lots of people on the internet get all up in arms when you say that. But just looking at it,
Stalinist. He was kind of, at least at the beginning, that's he always kind of pitching, right, more or less.
Yeah, like Stalin, he's not interested in the sort of ideals of communism that we talk about now. We don't. He's not going to hand the means of production to the workers because, as we rightly said, like his policies killed millions. What he's not
he
going.
did drink a lot too, so.
He gutted the Russian political scene of all the thought leaders and the idealists of the revolution because he if you keep him around they're going to be like, oh well, this isn't socialism, this isn't what we fought a revolution for, which is why they all ended up dead within like 10 years, I think, of the revolution.
He seemed very paranoid. I remember a lot of folks saying that he just kind of just had to keep killing people.
Well, I mean, you would be, wouldn't you? If you imagine you've just had a revolution saying, "Oh, we're going to overthrow the ruling class and we're going to change things for everyone," all workers matter and stuff, and then actually, like, you don't have any of that in mind at all. You just
wait. So what you're saying is they weren't post scarcity and they just made a lot of promises their asses, pardon my French, couldn't cash.
well, it wasn't even really that. It was that the revolution happened in 1917, like in the middle of World War One. So they're already fighting a war. They then have like Lenin has to deal with like different Tsarist forces wanting to return. You've got armies from different parts of the country trying to invade. You've got the war still going on. It's a bit of a mess. So what Lenin does is he starts a essentially what's a war government, which isn't so it clearly isn't socialist because it's like essentially a police state at this point.
That's
Um,
yeah, Egypt had that for a while.
yeah, no, it's not a good thing at all. And then Stalin, like Lenin, I think he tries to bring things back to even like remotely sort of what the revolution had in mind. But then he falls ill and dies, and so Stalin is left to take over the pieces. Stalin, who Lenin essentially said that shouldn't be allowed anywhere near the the keys to power and stuff. And the rest is history. Stalin and his 5-year plans kill millions, um, but turns the USSR into a massive war machine. Um, but going back to what I was saying right at the start of all that, the communist name that Stalin, well, it wasn't even that socialist name that Stalin gave Russia was not, it's a misnomer. It's the same thing as Kim Jong Un calling North Korea a democracy. It's like it's only for propaganda sake. It's not
So
genuine.
folks are mislabeling them.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's the classic trick. It's like why
Well,
any
aren't folks on like many sides doing that?
um what do you mean?
Like, like basically, if you kind of say it's like, well, no, he was basically being a Stalinist. He was implementing these 5-year, like, just horrific plans that just didn't go well. And now, in maybe more modern times, kind of to pull it back around when you were kind of saying like the far right, it's like you kind of like delve into like the National Socialists and everything, like the Nazis and stuff like that. Whether they're an actual neo-Nazi or just somebody just posting some strange offensive peppy memes on the internet to try to be edgy or something. It's like what I see, it's like, but you initially started on libertarians and like going down that path, it's like many of the libertarians, it's like they pretty much want to almost pave their own roads and stuff. They're just like, leave me alone, I don't care, just get the government out of there. So it's like I feel like it's not a good direct comparison. I feel like we're kind of lumping a bunch of folks that believe a bunch of different things and kind of calling them Nazis. And I think that's
Um,
where a lot of their offense comes from.
well, I mean, I don't think I actually did say that the libertarians were in with the far right. I did say that there were, there's connections and such, and the ideology stems from one another. But I don't think that's the same as saying, oh, they're all just Nazis. Um,
It was at the ideology point. Yeah, yeah. No, you didn't actually say they were Nazis. I see you kind of branched off, but it's just when you say that ideology kind of like leads to the Nazis, it's just I don't see the connection. I mean,
um,
maybe you could explain it a little bit better.
yeah, I'll go into it in a bit. But if I was going to finish what I was saying about Stalin and Hitler and stuff, you mentioned that um, what was it? Stalin's plans accidentally killed people, whereas Hitler's, intended to execute and remove
He
people.
had he had a plan. Basically, you can argue the management and the implementation, the times, the world, the wars in general. Yeah, there's an infinite number of factors. I get that, but it's just like millions of folks died.
Well, I would sort of disagree with the Stalin point. I think Stalin, recognized that Russia is a massive country with a lot of people, and essentially saw the fact that millions of people die as just the consequence, the means to getting his goals. He was very much an authoritarian
Did
dictator, and thus,
did it? Weren't there
well,
like a whole lot? And I'm not the best. It's been since college since I read the Communist Manifesto. So I apologize if I'm a bit rusty on some marks and stuff. But it seems like weren't there like folks called like the Kolaks? Weren't there like some farmers or something that like were fairly successful, and like a
that
lot of
was
folks were taken, and like the other folks weren't good at farming or they didn't have the experience.
in Lenin's period. I mentioned the sort of the
Mm.
police state and stuff. Like that was more Lenin's time period. Stalin, I think he got rid of them. I did this a few years ago. I'm a bit rusty on it, but
Wait.
um, Yeah, but I think it's a bit futile also to mention the Communist Manifesto and stuff in relation to Stalin because he doesn't care about any of it. Like he was having nice comfortable meals and drinking and stuff whilst his people are all starving. Like
Well,
that's
well,
not
well, that,
communism.
that was one of the other reasons I want. I'm sorry I cut you off, man. I'm horrible at that, but that was one of the reasons I want to come on because like it sounds like you have like a very thorough understanding of this, and like I'm not familiar, so I kind of wanted to come on and just kind of just learn a little bit and kind of like see whatever the quote unquote opposing side or the other arguments.
Yeah, sure. Um, Stalin, as we both said a second ago, a dictator, a liar, but not someone who was interested in communism or Marxism. He only kept even Lenin's image in good faith because it was good for his popularity. And then eventually he started, blaming Lenin for stuff as well. Um, all those, you got to remember that a dictator isn't going to be truthful, and thus, whilst it is the Socialist Soviets of Russia.
Didn't he call a hit on the president of the United States while he was drunk one night, and then they end up having to have him? Somebody had to say, "Well, there's kind of a hit out. Could you please not remove this?"
I don't know if that's true or not, to be honest.
Would it surprise you?
Eh, probably not. He's a bit more methodological, to be honest.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah.
going back to what I was saying, or what I was trying to say, like about Hitler and stuff. The Nazi Germany was a fascist state, and it used capitalism in its core things. Like people often say, "Oh, well, oh, it's got a state. Oh, it's got socialism in the name." And that was, fundamentally just like with Stalin, just using a word as a means to con people. So, for one, Hitler took the ideals of socialism and about worker liberation and perverted them. He, saw that workers in Germany were being, sort of interested in, the communists, the socialists' talk of liberating them, and decided to change that from liberation of class to liberation of, the Untermensch, or the Jews, the blacks, the non-Germans, the idea that the German people as a race were being, subjected by alien forces and stuff. That was his talk of liberation, because ultimately Hitler was, around to preserve the wealth and capital of the ruling class. There's a reason people like Henry Ford, backed him so much because his policies are good for wealthy capitalists. Workers losing their right to strike and losing their, rights to organize as unions and stuff.
Well, weren't they also buying a lot of cars or parts?
Sorry?
Weren't they buying a lot of his stuff though?
Oh
Like, I
yeah,
thought it
of
was just
course.
good
Yeah.
for his business. I mean, we can argue morals. I mean, business is business. It's no, I get it, dude. It's a complete moral thing, but it's just I feel like that often gets lost right now. When you were touching upon that a bit earlier with capitalism, I'm not necessarily sure it's like the CEOs and stuff. I think a lot of this has to do when you get into a publicly traded company. And what I mean by that is if you have a publicly traded company, very often you owe a fiduciary duty to your stockholders to maximize profit. That inherently says you need to make as much money as you can, or you could be held accountable. Because I remember I actually did work for a financial institution at one point. At one point before I worked there, they had gotten some trouble for some things. And I remember because I went in there and just like, you are not allowed to give advice unless it's this, or that. I mean, it's a very it was one of those things inherently when I was studying business in school that I'm like, all right, between that and the sheer fact that the only requirement to graduate from a double ASB accredited business school is 3 credits of ethics. And in that like 50-minute ethics class, Owen, they basically say, well, you might have chances where you can make a lot of money, but you shouldn't do it because it's wrong. All right. I'm just like, with all due respect, it's like this class is fairly standard. It seems pretty easy. And I'm just like, all right, I kind of felt like they should have been more.
Well, I'll come on to that in a second. If I could just finish what I was saying about Hitler and capitalism and stuff, if that's all right. Yeah, okay, brilliant. So Hitler, like I was saying, whilst obviously Nazi Germany did lots of trade with Henry Ford. Firstly, American politics, they're not exactly off to the left. They're also a pretty capitalist nation. And it's worth pointing out that a lot of Nazi Germany's policies regarding segregation, not segregation, sorry, the ghettos and the plans for the final solution and stuff, they stemmed from American policies in regards to their
Hey,
treatment
hey, hey!
of
Not
Native
all,
Americans.
not all, not all.
Not all, of course, but there's still those fundamental. The treatment of Native Americans in the US is one of the major inspirations for how the Nazis dealt with the Jews and stuff in regards to the ghettos and the concentration camps. Um, you got to consider that Nazism, was celebrated by lots of wealthy people in America and in Europe in general because Nazi policies for the economy helped those businesses. People, like to say, oh well, it's not capitalist because the state was involved, but the state only acted as an enforcer for the private property and the capital of the wealthy. As far as the actual policies of the capitalist elements of it were concerned, businesses could do what they want. They'd had suddenly a lot of regulations had gone. Suddenly, they've had their land privatized and handed to corporations. Hence the extreme wealth the automobile industry and steelworks and stuff had because of the lack of regulation and the privatization of so much. That's the thing as well. The term privatization comes from Nazi Germany. It was used to describe the policies in Nazi Germany. The Nazis, they may not be the stereotypical capitalists you see today, but they are fundamentally the consequence of a system of capitalism where eventually it turns into fascism because the limits for how we accrue profit is they're desecrated and removed. I think we should also talk about what you were saying about an ethics class just then, and how I
Well,
think you were insinuating that it was a little bit futile, a little bit pointless.
Not pointless, not pointless. It's just I felt like combined with that with some other classes and stuff. Like let's suppose you're taking like accounting or this and that. It's like if you're out there in the world, it's I forget what the movie was. You may have seen it, but basically they work at this office and they make an adjustment, and they're supposed to take like one 10 billionth of like a cent off of each ATM transaction, but they end up having it be 0.1 cent, so 1/10 of 1 cent. So the number of they end up having $100,000 at the end of 24 hours. So basically they were getting tracked because it was a lot of money all at once. But basically it's people can do sleazy shit. I say this as somebody, I spent 10 years in corporate sales. Don't get me wrong, I don't miss the money. And you know what? I'm not going to hate on somebody, and I find it difficult to crucify a person without knowing their life, their story, and everything. But it's just when I have times where it's like, all right, I can sell you this same product for $25,000 or $20,000. The only difference is the size of my commission check. It's like, I get it, man. I get it. Folks act in their self-interest. They tend to do that, but it's just like. And that's why I think, like, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever, I feel like we don't really have a lot of disagreement. I think a lot of the disagreement that we personally have, again, might be semantics, or at least the way by which we get to a similar result. And when I say that, it's like, I think if you treat somebody nice, and of course, if they have respect for you and everything, yeah, you're going to want to take care of them too. So, like, if you can do things where, like, if you can help somebody out, it's just like, I don't know. It's just like we use capitalism to try to codify this. It's like basically, I'll just draw it back to the ethics thing, man. Sorry, I get off the tangent here. But what ends up happening is folks are tempted. You could have things and just maybe you don't directly lie. Maybe you don't mention something. I'll be straight up, man. I'm guilty of this as well. Not mentioning something that basically maybe a customer calls. Well, why didn't you mention this? It's like a lot of times we fear just that no and stuff. And I mean, like, I can see the thing where it's like, literally, I could be at 100% of my goal. And then literally I have one customer, maybe they need to reschedule. Maybe one customer happens to cancel. Then all of a sudden, and I've had this happen, it's a tech shows up to a job on a Friday. Maybe it's a later afternoon, they get to it later. They have to hook up like a whole bunch of different equipment, do a lot of job. Maybe they go by. So literally your paycheck can go from a very substantial amount to literally half. So I see why folks had incentives, and some folks would kind of like play the system. And it's like, oh, okay, like I get that. That's up to you, but it's just, and that's why I like when you say like if we can work together and stuff, and like hopefully maybe we can each take something away from each other before the end of this. But as far as the ethics things go, I felt there could have been more there, at least in the university. At least if it's supposed to be some form of accredited type of degree, or if you're supposed to be managing business, I feel like that's something that at least I noticed at that time, based upon my experience. So, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so I think a lot of what you said there was quite interesting in that it draws into the themes of what I sort of think about, capitalism and stuff and money in general. So, I think it's refreshing to hear, someone say, openly that it would be nice to have a more ethical consensus in that world, as I sort of gather you were trying to say. Um, but obviously that's undermined in some ways by the sort of natural processes, like you said, the duty of the certain executives and stuff to deliver profits to their shareholders. The fact that cutting costs and trying to squeeze out every last bit of profit is going to take precedent in a business, and that isn't the fault of the individual. That's the system that is the problem, because if you're having something as important as ethical standards be sort of squashed to the side, like you said, sort of crammed into a little course, then that's not good for the overall society. It's good for the profits of the individual at the top, or the handful of people who are seeing those profits, but ultimately for all of us it's not brilliant. So for instance, you imagine someone in the UK, for instance, Sports Direct. It's this massive. I don't know if you probably don't have them in America, but
What was it again? I didn't catch it.
Sports Direct.
Is that like a sports store or a sporting goods store?
Yeah, essentially anything sporting itself.
Okay. Yeah.
But they're. Sorry, did you say you did or didn't have them?
Oh no. We have one of the big ones is Dick's Sporting Goods.
Okay, so the Sports Direct's got stores all over the country. The owner, Mike Ashley, is a billionaire. But then you look at the factories he owns, and you look at what goes on in those stores, and it's atrocious. You've got people on minimum wage, being shouted at by their employees, not allowed breaks, essentially like treated like robots, basically. And that doesn't happen because people are. Then Mike Ashley is like, oh yeah,
they'd have labor laws and stuff, right?
Oh, we do. Yeah, we do have labour laws in the UK, but that doesn't mean that they aren't pushed as far as they can go, and that doesn't mean that our government is, currently trying to scrap a lot of protections and has already, removed some protections and like benefits and stuff, and obviously like 0-hour contracts and stuff to maximize profits. But what I'm saying is that it's not like Mike Ashley is this cartoon villain sort of rolling dice and being like stroking a cat and stuff and being like, oh,
he's like, not Dr. Claw.
Yeah, no, he's not Dr. Claw. Yeah.
No. Well, here's the thing. I have to ask. It's like,
if you just sorry to cut you off. I wanted to finish this point. He's not that sort of, not a cartoon villain. He's a capitalist making profit, and the way he's making profit is by treating his workers as the least amount of ethical substance as he can. Not letting them go to the bathroom, to keep them on the what's it called, the factory line and stuff, production line, to make sure the products are all coming in and stuff. To not allow the workers real dignity, because if you did, then you'd be cutting your profits a bit, and every bit of profit counts, which is why Sports Direct are this massive corporation on the top of all this exploitation. This isn't even going into the fact that Mike Ashley's billions are built upon the labor of all those people in the factory, and the produce of that labor is all going to the boss instead of those who actually did the groundwork to make it all possible. But you go ahead. You were going to say something.
How, yeah, so in comparison, then, no, and I get it. And I mean, the argument to that be basically, I mean, if you're the CEO, you should have more responsibility. It would technically be a more stressed, involved job, one would think. And again, I recognize that every situation is different, but in general, let's face it, if you're a CEO and you are contributing a lot and you're bringing in however amount of dollars, like if you can calculate that in some way, it's like, okay, yeah, you should. I expect it. Yeah, it's a bit of there's going to be a hierarchy and just lots of different things. So it's like, all right, yeah, you should be able to make some more money. I get that. Gives folks something to aspire to. However, my question is in relation to at least your particular sporting goods store, the workers, as far as part of the contribution, like their actual direct value, which they would calculate out per person and everything, and then modify it based upon whatever laws and the economy in general, based upon their market at the time, like in relation to the value contributed, how much are they getting paid? Because in some of these like larger companies, and I've worked for some larger companies, I'll be straight up, man, it can be a real pain in the butt because I actually did have some situations where they literally were holding you to the clock. You had to be completely punched out, and they weren't necessarily accounting for certain things. Where if all of a sudden you eat something, man, maybe you have had that gas station sushi or something before, things may come up. You may have to take unplanned breaks. So it sounds like they're holding folks to the direct letter of the law, which I don't think is cool. But my question is he paying them a high percentage? Because a lot of those pain in the butt jobs, I got paid pretty well. I know a lot of folks do, and that's why they'll put up with them. So that's just kind of my question. Were they being paid a high percentage of what they were contributing?
Absolutely not. Certainly not a Sports Direct. I mean, for one, minimum wage is literally the least they can pay you legally. And then lots of them on 0 hours contracts. So it's not even like they've got a proper like working schedule. They get called, or they don't, not even that. They just they go to work, and if there's a job there for them, they can do it. But if they don't, then they're going that day without pay.
How's the unemployment over there?
Um, it's not brilliant. I mean, we've obviously it's in the West in general. We've got unemployment because we're gradually seeing um standards modernize and automation start to kick in. Obviously, it's not massively like societally everywhere yet, but it's still
For 40 years, man, 40 years. We should have some thoughts about it.
It's definitely on the way. Like that's not even in doubt. It's definitely coming. It's just a case of how the process is managed. It's something we can discuss in a bit actually. But yeah, the people at Sports Direct working there, they're not they're not earning a lucrative wage. I mean, I'll say that you don't choose to work at Sports Direct. It's
All because the UK has the was it the employment department stuff? Because I know they're pretty good about trying to help folks find jobs. Like,
Well, I mean, on
or
paper they are, but in practice, like it's it only seems good when you compare it to a nation with fewer, rights and protections like the US in terms of what it actually is like in the
well,
UK.
hey, dude, we got a 3.9% unemployment rate as of last month. So I
I
mean,
mean,
where
unemployment's maybe not as high as other places, but
well,
that doesn't mean that there aren't like problems and stuff still.
oh no, oh, no, we got problems. We got problems. I think that's one thing we all share. We all got problems.
um,
How do we fix these problems?
isn't that the question? But yeah, what I was saying, these workers who are being treated so poorly, not barely paid anything, squeezed for every sort of hour of the day they can get out of them, really not an ideal place to be in. And for what? So that the person at the top of the business can make their billions. And you said something quite interesting. The CEO has more responsibility. Now, firstly, I think it's worth saying that Mike Ashley, he's not the one managing these factories. He's not the one filling out this paperwork. He's not the one, doing all the groundwork to make sure all the products and stuff are meeting criteria and regulation and stuff. It's people underneath him doing that.
Is
So
is he is he a figurehead? Do
he's
people at
not.
least
He
respect
owns
him?
he owns the corporation. It's his name
Well, I
at
mean,
the
it's
top
hard
of
to
it.
argue with that, man.
However, but then you could, it's not like it's his labor that's going into it. It's not him doing the work. Yet, he's able to sort of sit at the top of the, the corporation, earning these billions. Like he owns a whole football club. which is another topic for another day because I can tell you about how
How deep?
badly.
Oh, geez. Oh, geez. No, no, I know. Oh, it's football too, dude. I'm sorry. All right, that will take a while to unpack. But no, for like, yeah, for like, well, how did he get the company? Like, did he start it? Did he buy into it, or like what happened?
Well, I don't actually know how he got the company, but his billions are built upon the labor of everyone else beneath him. Yet they're all going to this one person, and then a morsel of what the other people have produced are getting them back. Like you imagine if the workers who are being given minimum wage on 0 hour contracts, like you know, but essentially the ones doing the work in the factory, if they're not there, then Mike Ashley's billions don't exist. You're not going to have Sports Direct if you're not going to workers on the ground floor of factories or in the shops and stuff. Yeah, they're the ones treated like a cog or like a bit of scrap metal or something. Whilst Mike Ashley gets to sort of not even do the. It's not even like it's the stereotypical like hardworking little business owner. What does he do? You could like the people in this business, they're not going to ever see Mike Ashley probably because he's not like he's in the factory. He's in his like nice penthouse somewhere, like getting the odd call and maybe signing a bit of paperwork, and that's it. Like,
Well, I mean, if he started, I mean, you should be able to get credit for like if you're able to, because I mean, if he's employing a lot of folks, actually, you guys aren't that far behind us, dude. You guys are at 4.2% unemployment according to the Office for National Statistics or excuse me, age 16 and over. So if anyone under 16 was working, then they're not including that.
um,
That's not bad, dude. That's actually
maybe.
pretty good. It just
And
sounds like, yeah.
even if you sorry to cut you off, but even if you even if because he has the idea, it doesn't mean he's entitled to the value of other people's labor. Like if you had this idea of, oh, I wanted to make this business, you could still do that under a non-capitalist system.
How
It's
how
just
far how far off of the worker value? Like, what's the percentage of the workers actually getting? Like, how much of their value are they actually getting back? Like, what was the percentage?
what like the situation at the moment.
Yeah, like so, like if they're contributing something, their value to the company in their particular role, what in whatever factory or whatnot. If it's like $100 an hour and they're getting paid $10 an hour, then like they're only getting 10%. So I was curious, like what they were getting.
Oh, well, it's much less. It's like if they were paid a fair amount, they wouldn't need to, be walking there every day to try and get work. Like, because
Well, it's just like no. The reason why I asked that is just because like if they happen to for their particular role at that company, like I'll give you an example. So like when I worked in the security industry, a lot of times like let's say they paid me, I'll just rough estimate because math is hard, man. But friggin' $10 an hour. They're going to pay me $10 an hour for my labor at that site. Very often, my company or whom I might be working for in the industry, they'll charge maybe like $18 an hour, maybe $25 an hour. But they're also factoring in, I happen to be full time. They were paying for like my insurance and stuff. So you have to factor in about another 30% cost on that. All right, so I'm costing 13, maybe with benefits, they call it right around like 13, 14, $15 an hour, or something like that. But they're making a higher percentage. For me, it wasn't so bad because I was getting a pretty good percentage. And like dude, I had nothing really wrong with the security industry. So it's like, but I understand what you're saying. Like there are other businesses where it's like you may be providing an incredible value and they're paying you pennies on the dollar. So I was just curious if you knew the percentage.
well, I'm not gonna have a figure for the percentage as such, but it's vastly less than what they put in.
Do
Um,
do we know that though?
well, it is, isn't it? Because if you imagine their labor contributes to a multi-billion pound. Well, I suppose it would be dollars as well, but a really wealthy TNC, a company that dominates the country so much that like every high street in a city is gonna high street, every town center is gonna have a Sports Direct. Wherever you look, it's got a massive complex
Oh
in their
yeah.
city.
But do they actually have like um what is it? No, do they actually have like the profit and stuff? Like, because the reason why I asked that is because like Amazon, literally for like the first 10 years of that company, they were running at like a massive deficit, but they knew the investment over time would end up paying off astronomically. And I mean, now it's just like you never hear them saying it's like, is Amazon a monopoly? Because everyone uses Amazon. You're like, oh, but I didn't say that. I kind of did. I apologize to Amazon, but no. All I'm saying, no, I'm not trying to slander anybody, but it's just like one of those things. Like if it happens naturally, it's like, okay, let's take a look. But the reason I say that is because like a lot of these stores, yes, they might be popping up, but a lot of this is massive investment. So that like, are they posting billions of dollars in profit, or they just happen to be $1 billion company? Basically, they're expanding, they're large. They are also employing a lot of folks. We could argue over like the percentage they're getting. That's why I was trying to like hit the nail on the head. Like try to find like that good point, kind of like Tao in the yin and yang. That's probably take an act of God, but we can try.
Well, I mean, I think even regardless of their profits and stuff, the fact that you have a multi-billion corporation, and essentially all of that wealth, or most of that wealth, is controlled by a few people at the top, whilst the people who, however you look at it, are, is crucial to the business existing, because without the people in the factories, you don't have the products on the shelves. Without the people in the shops, you don't have the stuff on the shelves being sold and stuff. All that stuff. There's no business. Mike Ashley does not. You could probably knock a few zeros off his wealth, and you wouldn't even notice. That's how much wealth is controlled by these people. Yeah,
until his castle gets repossessed. The only reason I say that, man, is, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's just like at certain positions in companies, just because like for a while, like I did start kind of like my own business and stuff, and like I had at one point like 13 folks working under me. It happened to be a sales based thing, and a lot of the time it's like, yes, no, they provided me additional money, they provided me expense things, but it's like I only really applied for it's like what I really thought. And I hate fucking paperwork, dude. I think so many folks hate paperwork. Some folks can do it. I can't really do it. I'm just like, you know what? I'm trying to run this my own business. I'm going to spend my own money. Basically ended up being a $20,000 sunk cost, man. I learned a bunch of stuff, but dealing with your own problems is tough enough, man. To deal with your own problems, your customers' problems, and your employees' problems, dude, that freaking sucks and shit. Because like I was trying to get everything going. Like I was investing. Yeah, I could have made a lot more money by taking these deals, cashing them for myself. But it's like I wanted to keep the crew going to justify like them continuing to work as long as they're working hard and trying to contribute and everything. It's like, dude, it was a pain in the ass. And I say that, and I'm not in management right now, dude. It makes for a much easier life. So I'm saying if something's more of a pain in the butt, I mean, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, yeah, it's going to command a higher wage. I mean, that just makes logic, right?
Well, I get that if someone, was managing a lot of paperwork, that's a hard thing to do. But that still doesn't account for the fact that, the labor of everyone is, valued and should be seen as valuable to the, to receive the value of the produce and stuff.
But how do we calculate that? I think that's the ultimate underlying argument, though, isn't it?
Yeah, obviously it would be tricky, working it out, but we still got to try.
No. I agree. But it's just like, all right, I'll give you an example. I could never be a doctor because whenever I read the word blood and stuff, I start to get nauseous for some reason. It freaking makes me queasy. I don't know what it is. It gives me a weird feeling. I could never be a doctor, but should a doctor get paid the same amount as one of my initial jobs as a petroleum dispensing technician, aka pumped gas?
Well, you hear that question a lot, and on face value, a doctor is going to do more than the person on the petrol pumps. Then when you break it down, and when you think about the way things happen, the reason that petrol pump guy is seen as not very valuable is because the person who owns BP or Shell or one of those massive companies.
I made people smile. I tried.
But those the corporations that own that oil, they are paying you so little, because I can't imagine you were on a particularly lucrative wage as a petrol pump assistant or whatever.
I remember when my boss told me, he's like, you earned that like 50-cent raise. and dude, I was a little proud, and I realized there were folks making off like bandits. Don't get me wrong, dude, I understand that. It's just to kind of, and like, this is where I think a lot of folks are trying to argue, but sometimes it devolves into yelling or whatnot. It's kind of just like, all right, if we're agree on basically kind of, and I hear this from a lot of actually some of the folks that you have had words with. They're like, all right, we kind of need to flatten the organizations, or at least that's what I was hearing from these folks. Kind of like, maybe we don't need all these bosses, 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 and everything. But it's like, okay, we have a method in place where we can kind of take folks, maximize their skills so that they can earn a very honest and freaking just like decent quality of life, man. Like, I think that's like what I think both folks kind of agree upon usually when you have debates, right?
Mm. Well, yeah, like you said, like everyone wants to idealize a future where people have food, have a home, have the qualities of life that lets them be happy and stuff. And I think, like I sort of said at the start, you got to deconstruct the things that are, preventing that from happening. So going back to what I was about to say, the oil, the CEOs and the shareholders and the people at the top of these corporations, in the oil business, for instance, they are making billions off people, at the bottom, the labor. And however, seemingly easy it is to just sort of just stand around holding a pump, that labor still counts. And obviously, like people can in theory do their own petrol. Like certainly here in the UK, it's there's not really any petrol pump assistance. People just do it themselves. However, when you think about like the guy on the tills or the people driving the vans around, or even just like a bin man, they still have roles in society. And without those roles, society becomes much.
Have you dealt with society? Have you dealt with a lot of people?
Sorry?
Oh, I was gonna say dude, dealing with people can be hard.
Oh, absolutely. Like, and that's sort
Take
of
the
why. That's what I'm saying. Those roles are still valuable, and it's still important to that. They have value in society. And subsequently, when you see the massive difference in wealth between the boss and the person in the shop, the face-to-face person, you think, oh, well, that really isn't fair because their labor is making that boss extremely wealthy. Yet, what's that boss doing back in return? What's the person? Why does the person who's fundamentally an important part of society, um, you know, why do they
Can they serve as
get?
like an archetype or maybe like a goal for some folks? Because like at least, and you know what, maybe it's not the same way nowadays, but at least back in the day, at least over here in the United States, you kind of had like the American dream, where it's basically like if you went to like school and like you went out there, you busted your butt, you worked hard, you could earn a good, honest living, support a family, and own a home and be able to retire with dignity. But just it seems like it's been lost, and this is probably where we probably agree more and disagree. It's just you always hear the tales, like the person that started the mailroom that ends up being the CEO after like 20, 30 years there because they were there, they worked hard, and basically they aspired to something. Like, because like it's a good story, man. And it's my number two universal truth is, sorry about that, most everyone loves a good story. And like I think that doesn't really seem to be available right now. I think that is that kind of what you're saying? Is that what you're feeling? Like what's going on, man?
So I'll go and I'll just that in a second, because it's an interesting point. I want to actually discuss that. But all I was going to finish on with the point about profit and money and stuff is that if we want to achieve a society where we can have people being happy and sort of not having to worry about where the next meal is coming from, we need to address the whole idea of profit and stuff and of the you know the way we make money, because for a boss to exist making billions off the labor of people at the bottom, regardless of how you frame it as oh, people in the spotlight to do better and people can do this, it fundamentally isn't fair for those workers to be commodified like that, for their labor to be treated as just a way of the boss making profit off them and stealing the value of their labor for themselves. But coming back to what you're saying about the American dream, I think it's a really important thing to consider, because like you said, lots of people idealize the idea of themselves, working hard, getting a nice family, getting a house, and becoming, a valued American citizen. But then you look at the reality of that, and it's not really the case, because unless you sort of had, a lot of luck thrown your way, things might not have been easy. Imagine at the time of the 1930s, the Great Depression was happening, and people sort of lost
That was a
loads.
shitty time. Oh, sorry.
Well, exactly. It was a dreadful time. Like, people seeing their life savings just become completely worthless overnight. People seeing,
People jumping off of buildings, man. Like, dude, that's when people are jumping from buildings, it's like that's a bad day.
yeah, exactly. People, people who've been hardworking, buying into this American dream, working hard for years and decades, see their lives just crumble. And then you realize that these people are the workers who've been doing all this work. They've been the ones contributing to society, following rules, doing their, day-to-day stuff. But you look at like someone like Rockefeller or Mercer or Ford, what's happening to them? If anything, it's their money and their decisions that contributing.
Rockefeller did donate about 90% of his total life savings to charity before he passed. It's because I remember learning that. I'm like, I can respect a man that does that.
I mean, we gotta, like I was saying earlier, we gotta consider where
Again,
wealth.
business practices because of, yeah, dude, if you're gonna, and again, I think the thing might be is if you're trying to maximize profit, it's just, and I think this is where kind of like your main critique of capitalism comes in. It's just, what is capitalism? I speak as somebody that did study business, and basically the way they explain it is there are literally economic functions. There are actual financial calculus functions where it's like, all right, you're getting this amount of money. We're going to invest. Here is our tolerant level of risk given these market factors. There's mathematics to it. So technically, if you apply the mathematics and economic theory and basically all that fancy crap and math, because again, math is hard, stuff to capitalism, what is it? It's basically the calculation of how to maximize the profit to the shareholders. So
Well, of
what if,
course, like, I'm not
how
gonna
do we redo that without killing the incentive in the structure?
like, I'm not gonna, sit here and say, oh, there's no maths or anything behind it. But that still doesn't change the fact that someone like Rockefeller has his wealth through the labor of other people, through the land that has been essentially given to him or taken from others to provide his profits from, squeezing profits out of workers to make himself extremely rich. But what I was
Couldn't
saying
that
a
be
second
seen as
ago,
like an investment
what
to give back and stuff like that? That's just how I
well,
kind of remember it.
yeah, I'll come on to that stuff in a second because I wanted to keep on talking about the American dream, and we'll talk about the stuff there in a second. Um, but yeah, the workers who have essentially lost everything, having to queue up at food banks for so in obviously the Great Depression and stuff, they're the ones who did all that work, and then have essentially been cast out by the system once profits become harder to accrue. And you look at Rockefeller for well, it's all very well saying, oh well, you donate a lot of money to charity, but he was doing fine during this Great Depression. His money that other people generated, the workers who contributed their labor to the system and then had a
Is
morsel of that handed back, they're the ones that have lost out. But then, is that fundamentally fair? It sort of highlights that the American dream is a little bit of a scam, really. You look, and then you got to consider that it's on top of the already, the way workers are mistreated in America. Look at how black people were treated in America at the time of the Great Depression. Barring obviously the northern areas, segregation was still a massive issue. You still have the civil rights movement barely even starting. You still, even, continuation of it, because it's not like racism just ends when you pass a law. You've got mass incarceration, the war on drugs. You've got, American foreign policy desecrating nations around the world. The American dream is fundamentally, built on conning and lying to people, because ultimately this whole envisionment of Americans just being able to have a nice life is, juxtaposed by the reality of the system, where if you're, unless you're lucky, you're going to be faced with oppression and suppression and fearing the services supposedly there to protect you. Like, how many people are in prison in America? Like 4 million or something. That's more than countries.
as long as it's not a for-profit prison system, because then I might have to lose my mind.
Well, I mean, lots of it is for profit for one, but there's
Wait,
like
it is.
Yeah,
Wait,
loads of American.
we're incentivizing people to be put in jail.
Absolutely. And you have done, or America has done for, decades now. That's part of what we talk about when we talk about, capitalism and its relationship
We're
with oppression and stuff.
we're incentivizing private companies whom, as we were discussing, have a duty to maximize that, basically in a business where your job is to maximize the number of folks in jail.
Absolutely. It's disgusting, isn't it? Like,
That seems to be a problem, man. Just because, like, I understand business, and I don't want to crucify a man before I know the story, but just that just doesn't seem right, dude.
it isn't right at all. No, you're absolutely right. You look at, companies like McDonald's getting this, it's what's essentially amounts to a free labor force because they're paying them like less than proper wages because obviously they're doing penal labor.
I do have to take one issue with that because I do have a friend. He is a manager there, and he does actually like he does his best to take care of those folks. He deals with a lot of BS because remember, like you said, dude, you're dealing with stuff. And if you actually do have a good manager there, because like his does happen to be owned by a gentleman, he happens to be wealthy. He does have other stores, but he does go out of his way to try to do well by his folks. In every instance, does that always happen? No, I mean, just like, dude, I mean, it's just you're never going to be able to account for everything. I think maybe we can both agree on that. But I agree with you in that, yes, we should try to do better. I'm just trying to find a path forward. And it just, I think it's a more of an incremental thing that if we can do to help moderate it, because like, let's face it, folks are afraid to change and stuff like that. If you're proposing something that's extremely radical, it's just, it can take a while. And I think a lot of it deals with culture and like ultimately just being better to each other as human beings, treating each other with respect as another person on this earth that we have. If we can do that, I think folks are more accepting. That's why it's like, I think everyone loves to buy, but nobody likes to be sold.
Well, exactly. And what you just said there is brilliant. It's, yeah, human life is intrinsically valuable. You've only got one life. I mean, I don't know if you're religious or not, but we
Hey, you go your way, I'll go Yahweh.
um but yeah, like we got one life on earth. You gotta, make the most of it, and it's important to consider the value of your fellow man. um you know and that's sort of why we as socialists, as anti-capitalists, have these opinions and ideas that we do, because we want a world where people can get by. And like you rightly said, it's horrific that a private business can just sort of come into a prison and have a workforce there being paid next to nothing to maximize their profits. It's awful that the justice system is, funneling people into this through, rubbish laws like, marijuana, war on drugs, ridiculous.
Dude, my old real estate boss, one of the nicest guys in the world, dude. He spent time in jail and got a criminal record just because that time, like literally in Massachusetts, when he got caught with like a couple of joints on him, dude. Dude, but he's one of the nicest guys in the world. He owns like 60 something apartments and stuff now. Like actually, he rented to my cousin's like ex-wife and stuff like that. Like he was a pretty good dude and stuff. But it's I mean, like I'm just saying, like there are folks out there that are making money, and like I think like our genuine concern is kind of like taking care of the folks and just trying to make sure they have a decent life. And like I tend to believe it's like I think there might be a way, at least with technology, or at least in the coming years, where we can try to help give folks the ability to use their skills, their talents, try to find a job the best we can where they can utilize those talents to help monetize and just be able to have a decent life that's respectful.
Well, exactly, yeah. And like you said, like the criminal system doesn't care about the sort of the quality of a person, because clearly, like you said, your friend isn't a horrible person, he's a nice person. And then the system throws them into a prison essentially for what? Nothing. And ultimately the goal is to have them working for cheap labor to make money for someone at the higher end. And that's the system we've got to break down. We've got to realize that, oh, this system of commodification, of turning anything into a profit, um that's gonna result in some pretty awful stuff going on.
The only problem is then we have to factor in like the value of the human being. I How the fuck do we do? I'm sorry, man. Pardon my French. How do we do that?
Um, well, like I said, it's going to be tricky, but for one, we can see that, oh, we've got resources on this planet for everyone to have a home, everyone to have decent meals, everyone to have, education and stuff. We can have them, draw out these basic human rights and see, oh, well, we've got these resources. Let's do that. We can look at the system that allows, say, a Mike Ashley to make billions whilst the workers at the company are getting like nothing back in return, and think, oh well, this isn't fair. Let's do something about the way labor is treated and commodified. Let's evaluate the actual value of commodifying all elements of life and society. And then that's going to improve things on more than one axis, because suddenly if you remove that incentive to profit off things and actually think, oh, what is better for this role, what is going to help people and what is going to make people happy and stuff, suddenly things become so much better. So for instance, Sports Direct, suddenly it's not, oh, how am I going to squeeze enough hours out of my workers? It's, oh, how are we going to make the best sports products? How are we going to get them to everyone across the country? How are we going to have a system where people can access the stuff they want without having to need some person being paid a few pounds an hour on minimum wage? Suddenly that benefits everyone. Suddenly people aren't, it's not like they have to go and work at some horrid job just to get by. Suddenly we're utilizing technology to bring about automation quicker and to help people manage time and stuff. And people can, like you said, indulge in their skills, because imagine how many people have had the potential to be a musician or an actor or a sports person, but they didn't get in through luck or extenuating circumstances, and
Or
they
be a political commentator. Living
yeah.
the dream, brother.
Well, exactly. But we are curtailed by our need to sell our labor, and that power balance, that system, is fundamentally that's wrong, and we need to change it if we're going to progress. And that's sort of what the whole point of anti-capitalism is. Now I'm going to say that I want to wrap up soon because I'm getting a little bit tired, and that's nothing against you or anything, because I've really enjoyed.
You said right at the beginning, man. You're like, oh, I'm like, it's late in the day for you. I get it, man. No, I got you. No, we can wrap up next few minutes.
Yeah, sure. So if you wanted to say anything in response to what I just said, then.
Yeah, no, it's and to kind of just bring it back around and to help close home, kind of like, and that's why I wanted to like kind of come on here, speak with you and everything, just kind of like have a conversation and everything. And I do apologize for interjecting there. It's just because like that's just kind of in my nature. I'm kind of very spastic. I kind of like having a little bit of a go back and forth, just like not really with venom, kind of like how cats will play sometimes. It's just I like my little Char, but he's a good kid.
Well,
But
it's honestly no issue. I mean, I'm just as guilty in the past of cutting in at times as well. So I think it's natural, really. Like we all got ideas and we all want to say stuff. So
no, it's hard with latency too and everything. Just because hey, we got an Atlantic Ocean, but hey, we got fiber optics, man. God bless technology as long as it works. But no, but basically it's like. I think we're kind of trying to get maybe not to the same end, and like this would be a future discussion if we want at some point maybe discuss universal basic income or stuff like that, and like basically kind of go in the direction like I do think with the technologies that we have, and we again like when you hit the nail on the head right there with the automation, that is going to eliminate a number of jobs. Actually, my brother, it's a real quick 10-second story. One of our mutual friends, he predicted they happened to work at a warehouse. He was always kind of the crazy conspiracy theory friend. He's like, we're going to get replaced by machines. My brother's like, oh, not for a while. So 11 months later, they're replaced by machines. But that's another factor we need to have. Certain jobs aren't necessarily going to be here. What jobs are going to be available and how can we maximize it? And you know what? I truly believe that most folks are good people. But just because we're good people doesn't mean we don't do stupid, pardon my French, shit all the time. And folks tend to act in their self-interest, but we really are more similar than we are different as well. each with our own unique life experience. And I think somewhere in there, like, if we can get over ourselves and recognize the value in our fellow human and stuff, because I'll be straight up, like, I, I'm willing to pay for better service. Like, if I can talk with a real human being or something like that, there's something of value with human interaction. It's just, there's something there. I truly think, like, and if we can leverage technology, we can kind of bring it back around. It's just to get there at that point. I think utilizing, or at least being as liberal as many are nowadays with such term as Nazi, which, as we were discussing with Hitler, like, that's a very strong word. And just, I think to use it too loosely nowadays to describe the far right, and just even myself, apparently I had made a mistake where I thought you were saying like a lot of libertarian folks, and kind of you went into it like that being the base for like the Nazis and stuff. And like, at least in my mind, I'm like, a lot of these libertarians, it's like they kind of want to be left alone. So just kind of encompassing folks using those strong words and stuff, that's gonna, I'm gonna bring it back to the non-aggression pact, at least in a social or an internet sense. That's a digital provocation in a way. So they're going to start using harsh words, and it just feeds into a perpetual cycle of, let's face it, man, hate breeds hate. And like, that's why I loved for the ability to come on with you here with you tonight. And again, thank you for having me on, and just have this discussion and kind of just see where like different folks with their different ideas and their life experience, like where they're coming from, and just kind of get a better idea of what folks are thinking.
Yeah. I mean, I fundamentally agree with most of what you said there. Like, you know, the idea that we need to be taking into account that our system is changing because, you know, technology improves, and you don't. It's not doesn't make any sense to have a massive factory full of people when you can have robots do the same thing. Um, Again, you know, it's another major component of why capitalism is sort of seen as a thing that needs to be moved on from, because, you know, selling our labor isn't much good if there's no labor to be sold. You know, if we don't need people doing a job, then a system based around selling a labor to do that job is a bit flawed. um you know, I would say with the whole like Nazi libertarian thing and stuff, and like how I mean, yeah, I understand that it is it's jarring sometimes to hear, you know, those words thrown around, and especially if if you position yourself as, oh, you know, I'm a libertarian, I'm sort of, everyone should be kept keeping to themselves, like just, you know, getting by and stuff, and then, you know, someone like me sort of tries to make them think about stuff in a more stark contrast. You know, I can understand how that can be a little bit, you know, daunting to some people. And, you know, I don't mean to make them sound a bit, you know, weak-minded or anything, but yeah, no, but it's hard to comprehend. It's like, you know, when you think about that stuff, it can be a bit intimidating, but at the same time, I think it is necessary because, you know, ultimately, we still, as a society, if we are going to improve, we need to realize stuff about ourselves. And yeah, some of that stuff is good, like you were saying. You know, the fact that we're all human, we all want the same things roughly, and we can have a society where we're all happy and good if we all work together. But, you know, we still need to deconstruct the issues and problems in society, and, you know, that's, I think, where anti-capitalism, oppression is so important, because if we don't deconstruct our mistakes and our failings and analyze them to learn how we can be improve, we won't improve as a species, and we'll be in a worse position than we perhaps could have been if we'd have, you know, just taken the time to stop and think about what we're doing and the systems we have. Anyway, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the memes of destruction.
Thank you for having me. And like you said, man, 5 billion years, sun's going nova, man. So we got to figure this stuff out.
Well, exactly. Um, thank you everyone for watching. You said you had a channel. I could probably put it in the description or something, if you wanted.
Oh, yeah. Wait, I'm sorry. I was looking at Death in the chat. He said, again, there's libertarian socialism. I was just responding to him. I'm sorry. I didn't hear what you just said. My
No
bad.
worries. No worries. All I was going to say was, if you want, I'll put you mentioned you had a channel, so I'll
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. No, if you link it, that'd be great. No, cool, brother. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay. Anyway, this has been memes of destruction. I can't even speak then. This has been the two of us talking about, you know, politics, capitalism, and just the world in general. Thanks everyone for watching, and join us next time for another brilliant debate.